Boeing desperately needs to increase their aircraft production rates in order to have a chance to recover financially anytime soon. But incredibly, right now, Boeing seems to be keeping their 737 production deliberately slow. Why? Well, I'll explain that and how it's hurting Boeing's customers, but also why this might be exactly what Boeing needs right now. Stay tuned. Boeing is dealing with some really unhappy customers right now. The airlines need their new aircraft, and Boeing's long list of problems, mainly with the 737, 787 and the 777X, is making everyone impatient. And that situation doesn't look like it's going to get better anytime soon. Last summer, Boeing stated that their goal was to reach an output of 38 737s per month by the end of 2024. You may remember that the FAA limited Boeing's monthly output to 38 737s after the mid-cabin door blowout of an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 last January. Now, Boeing never got anywhere near that production rate in 2024, and last summer, when the company stated that end-of-the-year production target, we all knew that a worker strike was very likely, and that if it happened, it would derail those plans completely, which was exactly what also happened. The Boeing machinist strike that started last September lasted for 53 days, nearly as long as the 57-day strike that the company faced back in 2008. But back in 2008, the strike ended after a vote on a Saturday, and the first workers started returning to work already on Sunday night, just over a day later. Now, that didn't mean that the production started immediately. For one thing, many workers actually need certain certifications to be able to work on aircraft, and the length of that strike meant that these workers needed to be re-qualified before they could actually get back to work. And that obviously took some time. On top of that, suppliers also need time to bring people and machinery back online, and these companies and their workers might have their own certifications to worry about. But even so, Boeing's factories slowly started ramping up production after that 2008 strike, and that's basically what everyone in the industry expected to see after this latest strike as well. Back in November, Boeing's Michael Heidinger, president of the company's European and Middle Eastern regions, warned that it's much harder to turn things on than to turn lines off, which made total sense given what I just told you. But Boeing's recovery this time was completely different. Back in 2008, Boeing returned to a production output of 31 737s per month, which was also its pre-strike output just 25 days after the end of the strike. So how long did that return to pre-strike production levels take this time, do you think? Well, as we are recording this video, this still hasn't happened yet. Boeing are still nowhere near those production rates, and they don't look like they will get close to it anytime soon either. Now, the strike ended on the 4th of November 2024, and not only did Boeing go super slow in increasing production, they actually took until the 6th of December to even start the 737 production at their Renton factory. That's a full month after the strike ended. Now, I can't stress strongly enough how incredible this fact is. The strike had obviously kept the production lines for the 737, the 767 and the 777 freighter completely shut, but Boeing had been able to continue making the 787 because they previously consolidated its production to a non-union facility in South Carolina that obviously wasn't affected by the strike. Now, the 737 is the company's main source of revenue, their bread and butter aircraft, but Boeing was even slower in restarting production of the 767 and the 777 freighters. Those production lines in Everett started moving about a week after the 737 line in Renton. As I've explained before, the bulk of the money that aircraft manufacturers make with each aircraft they sell is due for payment on delivery. So, however many millions of dollars Boeing were losing each day of the strike in revenue, some analysts estimate it to be between $50 and $150 million per day, they therefore likely continued to lose for over a month after the machinists voted to end their strike, since the production wasn't restarted. Now, we also need to consider that the strike had some really painful effects for Boeing's suppliers and their workers as well. For example, Spirit AeroSystems, Boeing's biggest supplier, had to furlough 700 workers from around mid-October, and other suppliers had to make similar sacrifices as well. Even Airbus was affected because they share many suppliers with Boeing, and these suppliers couldn't simply shift part production overnight from Boeing over to Airbus. On top of this, there are also some further practical problems that come with production stoppages like this. By the time Boeing restarted the 737 production, Spirit AeroSystems had reportedly built up a stock of over 100 737 fuselages at its factory in Wichita. And not only were Spirit not getting paid for those, but they also were running out of space to store them. And they also had further storage issues with the parts that they were making for the 777 and the 767 as well. Meanwhile, as I said in the beginning, the airlines and lessors that are waiting for these planes are really beginning to lose their patience now. Willie Walsh, Director General of IATA, which is an airline representative body, accused aircraft manufacturers and some of their suppliers of anti-competitive behavior, basically of benefiting from their near monopolies. Now, to be absolutely fair here, the whole aviation industry is suffering from broader delays at the moment, which have nothing to do with Boeing. I've already covered Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan engine issues in another video, and of around 700 aircraft that have been grounded worldwide because of these and other engine problems, most of them are actually Airbuses. Airbus has been churning out airliners faster than Boeing for a while now, but they have been aiming for even higher production rates and struggling to meet them. So by now, these problems, combined with Boeing's issues, mean that airlines can't replace their older planes fast enough, which is actually increasing the average age of the world's aircraft fleets right now. According to Aviation Week, in 1990, the average age of an airliner was just over 12 years. But this has increased sharply recently, reaching 14.8 years in 2024. So even if the industry's new aircraft shortage isn't all Boeing's fault, right now is a really lousy time for Boeing to be voluntarily slowing down its production of the 737, both for their own sake and for everyone else. So why are Boeing doing this, and how could anybody think that this is a good idea? Well, I'll tell you after this. Did you know that producing videos like this often means navigating geo-blocked resources? That includes finding articles and videos in order to uncover the unique info and technical details that I know that you guys love. Well, that's exactly where today's sponsor, NordVPN, comes in. Nord not only keeps your connection secure and your data encrypted, but it also lets you access content from all around the globe. And yes, it is round. Whether you need industry reports, videos, or just your favorite shows, NordVPN gives you the tools to always have it available, no matter where you are. Which for me has been handy when trying to watch Mudo hockey in Spain, for example. On top of that, NordVPN has also now added a bunch of security tools that can detect malware, block ads, and keep your browsing private and secure, especially when using dodgy public Wi-Fis at airports, hotels, or cafes. So if this sounds good and you want to give NordVPN a try, then sign up for their 2-year plan using the link here in the description below, which is nordvpn.com/mentor now. That will give you 4 extra months for free, and the best part? You can test it completely risk-free for 30 days with a full money-back guarantee. Thank you, Nord. Click on the link below, and now let's continue. At this point, let me ask you a question. Where do you think that Boeing needs to focus in order to start its recovery? What area would you say is the one that should be looked at first? Well, many of Boeing's own promotional videos feature the image of constantly moving production lines where fuselages and other parts slowly make their way through the factory floor, gradually becoming 737s. For years, workers and other industry observers have highlighted how Boeing's management have been obsessed with always keeping that production line moving at all costs. That obsession meant that if some work couldn't be done because the necessary parts weren't available yet, well then the rest of the work just continued, and any missing parts and other associated work would need to be completed later, often as it sat out on the apron. This kind of delayed assembly process that completed away from the production line is called traveled work. Now, in many cases, this traveled work is unavoidable, so all aircraft manufacturers have to do it, at least to some extent. But doing work outside the normal assembly environment increases production costs, so manufacturers really don't like it, and they do whatever they can to avoid it. But more importantly here, by its very nature, traveled work is also a disruption, which introduces more chances for mistakes to be made, especially when work that should be done in one facility, for example in Spirit's 737 fuselage plant in Wichita, ends up having to be done somewhere else, like Boeing's 737 assembly site in Renton. There is a lot more to be said about this topic, as well as about the just-in-time manufacturing and supply networks, meaning that a manufacturer arranges for each part to arrive at the factory just in time and not before. In theory, this should mean that manufacturers don't need to keep stocks of different parts in the factory, which reduces the need for storage space and other associated costs, and therefore makes the whole manufacturing process cheaper. But one weakness of this strategy is that it becomes very sensitive to disruptions, especially during production ramp-ups or slowdowns, or pandemics or fleet groundings. Any problems with suppliers or transportation links can slow down parts deliveries, which often then causes delays in final assembly or, as I'm sure that you've guessed by now, traveled work. Again, this is a very broad topic that has a lot to do with how much a manufacturer relies on external suppliers versus doing things in-house. But the point I'm trying to make here is that traveled work is just one example of a process that introduces risks that can be hard to quantify or predict. For example, that 737 MAX 9 door blowout seems to have involved such work, but we will know more about that particular incident when the final report is released. Anyway, in the aftermath of the door plug blowout, Boeing announced that they were taking steps to reduce travel work, especially between Spirit's Wichita site and Boeing's 737 assembly site at Renton. This was a big change in thinking for the manufacturer at a period when people inside and outside the company were taking a much closer look at the company's processes. And the strike? Well, back in October, while the strike was still in progress, Boeing's CEO, Kelly Ortberg, said that getting production back up and running would be a bumpy ride. So one reason for the delay in resuming production is that Boeing's safety inspectors had to go in and look at the aircraft that had been moving along the production line back in September and then had been stopped there when the strike got underway. Because the inspectors had to make sure that they understood exactly where the planes were along the process, to make sure that nothing was missed when the work was resumed. But, crucially, it now seems that Boeing also treated the strike as an opportunity for another big change, or at least as a chance to take a really close look at the company's overall way of doing things, even if this meant a slower start in production. And that new approach impressed quite a few people. The FAA administrator, Mike Whitaker, visited Boeing's Renton factory early in December when it was still dormant, and he said, "The thing that I was most struck by was we're 4 weeks post-strike and we're still not producing airplanes because they're focused on their workforce, the training, making sure that they have the supply chain sorted out." And this brings me to Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg. When he joined the company last August, a lot of people, including me, hoped that this outsider could turn the company around, hopefully reasonably quickly. And some of Ortberg's early moves were really encouraging. For example, he immediately let it be known that he was personally moving to live close to the Seattle area near Boeing's 2 main aircraft assembly sites, Everett and Renton. This was very unlike previous Boeing CEOs who didn't really visit Boeing's production sites unless there was a press event for them to attend. Ortberg also made a point of using the old Boeing motto, "working together." And he got a lot of compliments from Alan Mulally, a respected Boeing commercial airplane CEO who had used the phrase "working together" for years when he worked at the company. As I explained in previous videos, Mulally was a Boeing engineer who was passed over for the Boeing Group CEO position in favor of former McDonnell Douglas and General Electric managers. And after leaving Boeing, he became the CEO of Ford and basically saved that company. When Kelly Ortberg was a young engineer at Rockwell Collins, he worked with Mullally on the 777, and more recently, Scott Hamilton in Leham News explained that Ortberg isn't just an admirer of Mullally. Since becoming Boeing's CEO, Ortberg actually has set up a circle of wise men to advise him, which includes Alan Mullally and Ray Conner, another respected former Boeing commercial airplane CEO. Again, this was very unlike previous Boeing CEOs like David Calhoun, who apparently rejected any suggestions for seeking such outside advice. Now, I personally love that initiative, as I think that everyone, everywhere, should have a kitchen cabinet of close, trusted friends that can come with genuine suggestions and help when we need it. This is actually one of the things that I will talk about in my leadership courses that I'm planning. Anyway, all of these moves from Ortberg are really positive, but not everyone was a fan. After the strike of the Boeing machinists got underway, the machinist union leadership were initially quite reserved towards Ortberg, since he was a newcomer in the company, so they couldn't really blame him for Boeing's past sins. But this then gradually changed. Ortberg didn't take the lead in the negotiations with the union, apparently delegating most of that work to Stephanie Pope, the current Boeing commercial airplane CEO. But as the negotiations got increasingly problematic, the machinists started to complain that Ortberg remained largely absent from the whole process. Then, when Ortberg did take part in the negotiations towards the end, union leadership said that he played hardball, threatening to start making worse offers if union members wouldn't accept the things that were already on the table. Now, negotiations like these would never be easy, and we will have to wait a bit longer to see how Boeing will move forward from the strike, but it is worth pointing out that even though the machinists got some substantial concessions from Boeing, only 59% of them ultimately approved it. So that theoretically means that the remaining 41% are dissatisfied workers that Ortberg and his team now needs to win over. Just for reference, that older 2008 strike ended after 74% of workers approved Boeing's offer. Now, Ortberg also announced job cuts during the strike, but these cuts had almost certainly been on the way months before Ortberg's arrival. Of course, Ortberg also has to win over a lot of people outside of Boeing. Analysts and regulators may be pleased to see Boeing taking the time to restart production, but as I've already explained, many suppliers and customers feel very differently. Here we also have to bear in mind that many of these suppliers are actually smaller shops for whom Boeing is basically their only customer, and they really suffer whenever there's a long production stoppage like this. These suppliers also need to plan their ramp up once things get going, and an extra month of stopped production can therefore impact them quite hard. And of course, obviously, the same goes for the airlines, who really need and have been planning with their new aircraft that they're expecting Boeing to produce for them. Of course, Boeing's own financial recovery is also going to be slower if they don't ramp up quickly. After the 2008 strike, Boeing may have taken just 25 days to restore its production rate, but they took 2 years to fully recover financially from it. So, following an even slower, more careful approach could actually extend that recovery timeline even further. But I think that that's really missing the point here. You see, this time around, Boeing aren't just moving past another strike. No, what Boeing are really recovering from is literally decades of heading down the wrong path. So, slowing down and looking inwardly seems like a reasonable way to start in my eyes. Now, that's not all that Boeing is doing right now, though. The company are also looking at ways to sell off non-core elements like its Jeppesen navigation unit, according to recent reports, and that sale could be worth $6 billion. And even before that, Boeing had also been looking at the possibility of selling off some elements of its space operations as well. And at the opposite end, Boeing is now reintegrating Spirit AeroSystems back into the company, something that could take many more months to complete. As I've explained before, Spirit AeroSystems used to be part of Boeing until 2005 or so, and spinning them off is something that Boeing has since regretted bitterly. Of course, today, Spirit is also an Airbus supplier, so returning things to the way that they were before the split is going to be a far from an easy process to do. But having more direct control over Spirit's work is key as Boeing tries to reduce its risk factors. And that's crucial, because if there is one thing that everyone agrees on, is that Boeing can't afford any new mishaps caused by production issues at the factory. After everything else that has happened, another event like the door blowout could be utterly devastating for the company. And that's why I think that Boeing's extremely slow and guarded 737 production restart is ultimately a good thing. In the end, this is all about handling mistakes. And mistakes will always happen on the production floor, just like they always happen in our aircraft cockpits. But the way that we deal with them, both in the factory and in the cockpit, is by making sure that we catch those mistakes, by building the right procedures and doing the right training for our people. That's how we stop simple human errors from endangering lives, and what we're seeing Boeing do right now is similar to how we pilots might take an extra turn in the hold to make sure that the coming approach is properly briefed and set up. Now, the strike was extremely painful for Boeing, but using it as an opportunity and following it up with an inward look makes perfect sense to me, and is actually what I was hoping would happen. Ortberg has publicly said that Boeing's first two priorities should be to fundamentally change their culture and to stabilize the business, and this slow start should help them do both. Now let me know in the comments below what you think about all of this. Is there anything different that Boeing could do? And by the way, we have just added a 737 MAX difference training to our virtual 737 course that Ben and I are doing. And if you're interested in checking that out, there's a link to the course here in the description below. Please consider supporting our sponsor if you want to support what we do here on the channel. Watch these videos next and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.